Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Grace. It is lovely to have you here. I don't usually film book hauls, mostly because I don't really buy books anymore unless I'm incredibly excited for them and they're from an author I know I love already. Mostly because I don't really find it fun anymore. As you can probably tell, I already have a lot of books and a lot of books that I haven't read yet. I have very much fallen prey to bookish overconsumption in the past and bought more books than I was ever feasibly going to read. So now I mostly just find book buying stressful, but one thing I don't find stressful is using my library. There are obviously still going to be new releases that I'm excited for. New stories are always going to be exciting, so I usually have a good number of books out from the library at any given moment. I currently have 20 books out of the 24 book limit that we have. Will I read all of those books before I have to take them back? No, no I will not. A lot of them are chunky fantasy books that I definitely won't manage to get around to because I'm quite a slow reader anyway. But it's all okay because every time you take a book out from the library, that boosts their statistics and shows the people that fund the libraries that it's still a worthwhile service. So it's all still a positive thing as long as I'm taking the books back on time. And I should caveat all of this probably with the fact that I work at a library myself. So it is probably easier for me to use the library than the average person, but I still think they're just such an incredible resource and I would love to see more people using the library more regularly on BookTube and all of the internet bookish spaces. So I thought it might be fun, seeing as I do use the library so much, to give you an update on all of the books that I have out from the library currently, and I thought maybe I might start doing this every few months, especially because I work there and I'm just constantly kind of scanning books through, picking up books that someone's returned, getting books recommended to me. I often discover books at the library that I have never really heard talked about online, so the hope is maybe you can find a hidden gem in here that you wouldn't have heard of otherwise, but sounds really interesting to you. But let's get into it because we have a lot of books to talk about. First of all, we have a new release that I'm really excited to get to, and that is Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stephen. This is a young adult fantasy about a girl called Evelyn who has lived countless lives, has been reincarnated countless times, but has always died before her 18th birthday. But in the current life that she is living, her little sister needs her to stay alive in order to live herself. So she has to find a way to break this curse and to track down the person that has been hunting her through all of these different lives. The only problem is she also has to figure out how not to fall in love with them this time. I have been really interested in Laura Stephen's work for a while now. I've heard really good things about her other books, but those honestly sounded a little bit too spooky for me. She usually writes a little bit creepier, I think, and this one sounds more like my kind of thing. But I've heard a lot of good things about this one too. I've heard that the writing style is really gorgeous. I think this is probably the one of her books that has blown up the most, but everyone I've heard talking about it has really enjoyed it, so I do have quite high hopes for this one. Then we have Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. This is a fantasy book set in a world where dragons and humans used to coexist, but many years ago, the humans betrayed the dragons, stole their magic, and forced them into exile in a different world. In our current time, when this is set, the humans now worship the dragons, but the dragons haven't forgotten what they did to them all those years ago. In this story, we follow an orphan named Arcady who is thieving a living on the streets. But one day they hear about a chance to steal a powerful magical artifact which could totally change their life. But the magic of this artifact has unexpected consequences and summons the last male dragon from the other realm back into this human world. Now this dragon, Everin, knows that they could get all of their power back if they can only persuade Arcady to bond with them and then kill them. One thing that really excites me about this is that Arcady sounds like they're non-binary, and I really want to read more books with non-binary main characters. I've also heard mixed reviews about this one, but it's the kind of mixed reviews where they only make me more interested because the bad reviews have kind of said that the writing in this is too weird and metaphorical, and honestly that is more of a green flag for me. I really like a weird writing style that takes risks and experiments, so I'm really intrigued by this one, and I'm always a sucker for a good dragon story as well. Then we have a graphic novel. This is Coming Back by Jessie Zabarski. I honestly was just really drawn in by how cute this cover is. This is a fantasy story with, from what I can tell, a reasonably large sapphic romance subplot. This is set in a village where everyone has magic of some kind, everyone except for Velissa, and Velissa has feelings for a girl called Preet, who has the most magic of everyone in this village. Because of this, Velissa doesn't feel worthy of Preet's love, but one day the town is attacked and Velissa is given a chance to prove herself, but in order to do so she'll have to leave Preet behind. Now Preet, having no one left to turn to, ends up breaking one of the town's most sacred laws, and because of this she is exiled. This sounds like it could be a really sweet story that delves a lot into our insecurities, especially within a relationship that need to feel like you are good enough for each other. Honestly, if I see a sapphic graphic novel with a cute art style, then that's enough for me. And I know I need to get to this one soon because someone just put a hold on it as well. Then we have Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. If you know me, you know I mostly read fantasy. I don't read that much contemporary fiction or literary fiction especially, but usually when I do read it, I end up really enjoying it, so it is something I want to make more a part of my reading diet, let's say. And this one has really called to me. Honestly, I have such a memory of this being really popular, at least in the UK in like 2022, and it being like the cool girl book. I'd see so many TikToks of cool women reading this on the tube in London. But it does sound really interesting as well. This tells the story of Martha, who seemingly has the perfect life. She is a very skilled author and she has a husband who loves her very much. But one day something within this seemingly perfect life goes terribly wrong and she ends up back at home with her dysfunctional parents, trying to figure out if a life is ever too broken to be fixed. Honestly, I ended up reading the first couple of pages of this one on a very quiet shift and I was really drawn in by the writing style. It feels very incisive and quite funny, which will help me definitely, because one thing that puts me off literary fiction sometimes is it being just a bit too heavy and too sad. I need a little bit of levity in there as well, and I'm hoping this will give me that perfect balance. Then we have A Harvest of Hearts by Andrea Eames, which I mostly picked up because it is very clearly heavily inspired by Howl's Moving Castle. This tells the story of Foss, the butcher's daughter, who knows to avoid the magic workers when they come into town because they harvest hearts to use in their spells. And even though she's sure no one could possibly want her heart because she's too plain and clumsy, one day, seemingly by accident, a sorcerer does end up snagging a piece of her heart. So she stomps over to his magical house to demand for it back, but he seemingly doesn't know how to give it back. And according to his magical talking cat, he seemingly doesn't know much of anything. So it's up to Foss to figure it out herself. If you don't know, Howl's Moving Castle is one of my favourite books of all time, so when I can see that a book is clearly inspired by it, I'm always going to be intrigued. I think it does add that layer of, can anything live up to the original? In my estimations, probably not, but it does sound like a really fun time. It sounds quite whimsical and a little bit silly, which I enjoy. And I'm always a sucker for a magical cat. Then we have The Hurting Kind by Ada Limon. This is a poetry collection and I am once again trying to get back into my poetry era. I have this habit of forgetting for like 6 months on end that I like poetry, and then something will remind me and it's like I'm unlocking a new part of my personality again. And this time it has mostly been triggered by the library once again, because one of my co-workers has been putting together these Poem of the Month posters to put up in our poetry section, and he asked for some recommendations from the rest of us who work there, so I started doing some research to find some more poems that I might like. And Ada Limon is one of the poets that I stumbled across, and I had never heard of her before, but apparently she was the American Poet Laureate, so clearly she must be reasonably well known. Everything I've read from her so far I've really enjoyed. She uses the natural world a lot in her poems, which is always one of my favourite themes. This is described as a collection about interconnectedness between the human and the non-human, ancestors and ourselves. And the title comes from these couple of lines. I have always been too sensitive, a weeper from a long line of weepers. I am the hurting kind, which honestly mood. I am a very sensitive soul myself, so I feel like I might feel quite seen by this one. Then we have the first in an epic fantasy series, because I need another one of those. This is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. I think that this was part of the Orange sapphic fantasy trifecta a few years back, along with Prior of the Orange Tree and the Jasmine Throne. In this we have two main characters. First off, we have Torraine, who was stolen as a child and trained to fight for the Empire, but she has been called home now to stop a rebellion in her homeland. Then we have Luca, who is desperately trying to reclaim her throne, and she needs a turncoat. She needs someone who can sway the rebels back towards peace. This sounds like my favorite kind of fantasy. I love political intrigue so much, and I love a little bit of enemies to lovers as well. I haven't heard as many people talking about this series as Prior of the Orange Tree, of course, or the Jasmine Throne, really, but this one sounds really interesting to me. It sounds like it has a lot of interesting themes in here, and I also would like to find some new fantasy series by BIPOC authors to read. If you've read the series, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Then we have Homegrown Magic by Jamie Paxton and Rebecca Podos. This is a queer cottagecore cozy fantasy. I was really hooked by the cover when this one came in one of our new delivery boxes. We follow Yale, who is the heir to one of the most powerful and rich families in the realm, but they don't want to take on that responsibility. They decide instead to run away on their own adventure. Then we follow Margot, who is a plant witch who owns a greenhouse, and she has been desperately trying to keep the family business afloat ever since her grandmother died and their family fortune was actually stolen by Yale's family. So when Yale, her childhood friend and also former crush, stumbles back into her life, she decides to give them a place to hide and also a job. This just sounds really sweet and cozy. It feels like it has a little bit of a Regency era vibe. I don't think it's necessarily a fantasy of manners per se, but leaning that way, which I always really enjoy. And again, we have another non-binary main character. I'm really enjoying that that seems to be cropping up more often now. And I think in general, when it comes to a cozy fantasy, if it can be kind of garden magic and nature magic themed, that is definitely my preferred leaning. So I feel like this could be right up my alley. Then we do have a full-on fantasy of manners, which I'm really excited about, and this is The Beautiful Ones by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is, I believe, on my 25 books I wanted to read in 2025. And I am still really excited about this one. In this we follow Nina, who is desperately trying to fit in with high society, but she can't seem to get her telekinetic magic under control. It keeps getting her into trouble and her reputation is at stake. But one day, a performer called Hector appears in town who uses his own telekinetic magic to entertain. And he doesn't see Nina's power as a burden or an embarrassment, but as a skill that she can learn to hone with his help. And as he starts to teach her, she begins to fall for him, but she doesn't know that he is keeping a terrible secret from her. This is one of those stories where I don't necessarily hear it talked about that often, but when I do, it's always from someone who's really passionate about it and really enjoyed it. The fantasy of manners subgenre is one of my favorite things. I just love that combination of the feeling of Austen manners and whimsy with magic. So I'm always really excited to read another one, and the fact that I've heard such good things about this one means that I have pretty high hopes. Then we have Among Others by Jo Walton. In this story, a girl called Maury finds out, I didn't mean to rhyme there, a girl called Maury finds out that her mother has been using black magic, and in the ensuing battle she is gravely injured and she loses her twin sister. It also means that she can't go back to her home in the Welsh valleys, so she decides to bury herself in stories instead. But try as she might to move on with her life and her books, her mother is still bent on revenge. Jo Walton is such an interesting author to me because everything she writes seems to be completely different from the last book. I have only read one book from her, and that was Tooth and Claw, which was basically if you took Austen but made all of the characters dragons. It was weird and it was great. And this has won several awards. This won the Hugo and the Nebula Award, and it is reviewed by Patrick Rothfuss, by Ursula K. Le Guin, by Jeff Vandermeer. She feels like one of those writers who other writers love, and I'm just so intrigued to get into one of her older works. I just really love when a writer takes risks and writes weird things. This isn't a book that I've ever heard of out of the context of knowing her as an author, so I feel like it probably doesn't have that much commercial appeal, but it sounds really interesting to me. Speaking of books that I had never heard of before, then we have All of You, Every Single One by Beatrice Hitchman. I just skimmed the blurb of this one while I was unpacking it one day and thought it sounded really interesting. This is set in 1911 and we follow a woman called Julia who leaves her husband for a tailor named Eve, and the two women run away together to Vienna. Of course, living together as two women in a relationship during this time is going to be difficult, but the two of them do manage to make friends. But then Julia really wants to have a child, and this longing seems like it could destroy their happiness together. And then there seems to be a separate thread in which we follow Freud, who has a new patient, a wealthy and troubled woman named Ada, who has suddenly lost the power of speech. Now, I have no idea how these two things are going to interconnect, but I feel like they probably will. And then I went on to read the first page of this one, and the prose is just gorgeous. I just want to read you the first couple of lines. The lake is freezing. The words gelid, boreal, glacial don't do it justice. Chunks of the whole break away, float and sink. Black oiliness, the consistency of nightmares. Impossible to see where you should put your feet. I just think that's a beautiful opening, and I immediately checked this out upon reading that. So I'm always really excited to hopefully find a new book that fingers crossed will really like, that I've never heard of before. Then we have Girl Serpent Thorn by Melissa Bashardust. This is another young adult fantasy, which I don't read as much these days, but this one has been calling to me for quite some time. This is the story of a princess named Soraya whose touch is poisonous. If anyone touches her, it is deadly. And all her life she has been hidden away in her gardens, but as her twin brother's wedding approaches, she must decide if she is willing to finally step out into the light. Honestly, there is something about this book that, in vibe at least, just really reminds me of The Midnight Lie by Marie Rikowski, which is one of my favourite books ever. So I've always been curious about this one. It might be because I know there is a sapphic romance in here, although I have heard that it is not a huge part of this book, so I want to keep my expectations for that realistic. But I think also from the first couple of pages, the writing style feels quite similar, quite lyrical, which I always enjoy. And there is a lot of mythology in The Midnight Lie, and I know that this one is inspired by Persian mythology, which sounds really interesting. So I'm hoping that comparison in my head won't doom this book for me, but I've just always had a feeling about this one. Then we have a couple of sci-fi books, which again, I don't read that much of currently, but I really would like to branch out a little bit more. And the first one is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This one I think I heard about because Carrie from Carrie Can Read mentioned it and she really enjoyed this one. In this we follow an ambassador named Mahit who has been sent from her mining colony to the capital of the empire, and when she gets there she finds out that her predecessor was murdered, but no one else seems willing to admit that. They all say that it was an accident. So she has to navigate the deadly halls of the capital whilst also hunting for the killer and trying to stop the empire from annexing her very independent colony, and at the same time hiding an extraordinary technological secret from them all. Again, we have a heavy political intrigue plot here, it seems, which is always exciting for me. I am a little bit nervous for this one because from reading the first page it already sounds quite technologically complicated. I don't know if it is for sci-fi or if I'm just a bit of a noob. But I think one of the things that has put me off sci-fi is that I don't necessarily feel smart enough, but I'm hoping that, like with fantasy, once you've read a few, it gets easier. And because this one has all of that political intrigue that I think will hook me, I'm hoping that this would be a good kind of entry point. And then the other sci-fi that we have is The Freeze Frame Revolution by Peter Watts. This is one that I, again, had never heard of before, but one of my co-workers just brought this back in the other day, having read it themselves, and they said it was really good. And I had just forced them to read The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett because that was my favourite read last year. So I owe them one, so I thought I would pick this one up. I'm just gonna read you the blurb because honestly, I have no idea what this is about. How do you stage a mutiny when you are only awake one day in a million? How do you conspire when your tiny handful of potential allies changes with each shift? How do you engage an enemy that never sleeps, that sees through your eyes and hears through your ears and relentlessly, honestly, only wants what's best for you? Sunday Asmundin is about to find out. This is reasonably short, thankfully, so I'm hoping that will help. But even just flicking through this one, there are random letters that are written in red instead of black. And I'm wondering if there's some kind of code throughout. This very much feels like diving straight into sci-fi, and I probably wouldn't have picked it up if I hadn't been recommended it, but I'm going to trust my co-worker's opinion on this one. And it does sound really interesting. I'm just hoping that my brain is up to the task. So sorry if you've moved. I had to go and empty my memory card. Going back to fantasy, then we have The Pomegranate Gate by Ariel Kaplan. I think, again, I'm just going to read you the start of this blurb because I don't know how to concisely phrase this. Toba Perez can speak, but she can't shout. She can walk, but she can't run. And she can write in 5 languages, with both hands at the same time. Okay. And then our other main character, Naphtali, dreams every night of an orange-eyed stranger, and when he's awake he sees things that aren't there, and he also carries a book that he can never lose but also never read. When the Queen of their land decrees that all Jews must either convert or leave, the two of them are forced to flee, but in the ensuing chaos both of them are separated from their caravan, and lost in the wilderness, Toba ends up following an orange-eyed stranger through a mysterious gate in a pomegranate grove and into a mirror world. This one is described in all of the blurbs as numinous, strange, unearthly, mythic, and all of those seem very accurate even just from that blurb. This sounds very strange, but very interesting. It's giving me almost slightly Erin Morgenstern vibes, a little bit Starless Sea to it. And I love that book, so that is promising. And I also really love a portal fantasy, which it sounds like this is. It is reasonably chunky, so I'm a little bit scared, especially because this is the first one in a series. And I've also never really heard anyone talking about this book, so if you've read this one, please let me know. But it sounds really intriguing, and the fact that the blurb is that lyrical makes me think that the writing also will be, which tends to be my preferred kind of style. I'm just hoping it isn't so weird that I have no idea what's going on, but hopefully it will hit the mark. Then we have another poetry collection. This is Goblin Market and Other Poems by Christina Rossetti. Honestly, I felt inspired to pick this one up because I saw Christy Ann Jones reading it as inspiration for the novel that she's currently writing. And I realized I've heard about the Goblin Market and I've read books inspired by it, but I've never read the original poem. But I really enjoy that vibe and that atmosphere of kind of losing yourself in a magic that maybe is darker than it initially appears. That's kind of my level of creepiness. I like creepy things in summer, that kind of feeling of rotten fruit, rather than that autumnal heading into winter spookiness, I think. So I'm really excited to read this one in the summertime. Just for some context for anyone who doesn't know the Goblin Market, it is a poem which describes the beauty and the draw of the Goblin Market, but also the danger of it and how young girls can fall for that forbidden fruit, but then come away intoxicated and desperate for more of something that is in the end going to doom them. I just love the vibes. I'm really excited for Christy's book when hopefully it comes out based on this, because I love that kind of atmosphere. It reminds me a little bit of The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. Obviously, this was written first, but it feels similar in tone, and I've never read anything from Christina Rossetti before, so I'm hoping this can be another step on my journey to become a poetry girly once again. Then we have In Other Lands by Sarah Reese Brennan, which was actually recommended to me by a viewer a good while ago. If that was you, thank you, because this does sound really interesting to me. This is another portal fantasy. In this one we follow Elliot, who is a 13-year-old boy who is very smart but also a little bit obnoxious, and one day he's on a school trip and he sees a wall that no one else seems to be able to see, and passing through this wall he finds a magical other world full of magical creatures and a magic school that he can now attend. This sounds really funny and quite irreverent. It feels like one of those books where it's going to take all of the classic tropes of fantasy and turn a lot of them on their head. For example, one of the other main characters is an elf called Serene Heart in the Chaos of Battle. It's also been reviewed by Lee Bardugo and Holly Black, so Good signs. Then we have another graphic novel. This is The Princess and the Grilled Cheese by Dea Muniz. This one just seems really silly, goofy and fun, and I'm really excited to pick this one up. We follow Lady Camembert, who lives in a kind of Regency inspired world, but everyone's named after cheese. And also I had a flick through and I'm sure I saw someone using a Nintendo Switch in here at one point, so it's kind of chaos. But family fortunes can only be passed on to men. So when her father passes away, her only other option is to move to the capital city and start life over as Count Camembert instead of Lady Camembert. But it becomes very difficult to blend in and fly under the radar when she meets Princess Brie. Princess Brie is beautiful, she has an incredible sense of fashion, and she's also an activist. And Cam really can't resist getting to know her better, but as she does so, can she still keep her secret? This again is another sapphic romance, but it just sounds so silly in the best way. Again, I really like the art style of this one. I think it looks really cute, and the setting just sounds so weird and goofy. So I think when I need a little bit of levity from my chunky fantasies, I'm gonna pick this one up. Then we have a romance. We have 7 Days in June by Tia Williams, which honestly I have ordered a little bit early because I really want to read this one in June, but I wanted to make sure that I got it in time, especially because I think this was another one on my 25 and 25 list. This is a romance that I've heard great things about. In this one we follow Eva, who is a single mum and an erotica writer, and also Shane, who is an award-winning author, and the two of them meet at a literary event in New York and sparks fly. What no one else knows is that 15 years ago, when the two of them were teenagers, they actually were in love for a week. And now, as the two of them reconnect whilst pretending to the world that they are strangers, Eva does not trust the man who broke her heart all of those years ago, but she has some questions. Like I said, I've heard really great things about Tia Williams' writing and the chemistry between these two characters, and I'm really trying to find other romance authors that will hit for me like Emily Henry, because I feel basic with her being one of my only romance authors that I really, really love. I read an Abby Jimenez recently, which also still feels a little bit basic, but that's okay. And I did really enjoy a book by Talia Hibbert last year. I'd like to read more from her, but I really want to widen my pool of romance authors, and Tia Williams I've heard great things about, so I'm really excited to read this one. And I'm going away in June. I'm going to Greece for a wedding, so I think I might bring this one with me to read by the pool. I'm really excited for a good summer romance read. And last but not least, we have The Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekhara. This is another one that I had not heard of before it came into the library, but it seems to have won a few awards, and all of the reviews I've seen of it since have been really good, even if it's not as well known. This is another one where I'm just going to read the blurb to you because it sounds confusing. Feta was raised to kill, honed as a knife to cut down his sainted father. This gave him plenty to talk about in therapy. He walked among invisible devils and anti-gods that mock the mortal form. He learned a lethal catechism, lost his shadow, and gained a habit for secrecy. After a blood-soaked childhood, Feta escaped his rural hometown for the big city and fell into a broader world where divine destinies are a dime a dozen. Everything in Laureate is more than it seems. Group therapy is recruitment for a revolutionary cadre. Cad?
In English or American, this is to be pronounced cadre.
Cadre. Group therapy is recruitment for a revolutionary cadre. Junk email hints at the arrival of a god. Every door is laden with potential and once closed may never open again. The city is scattered with bright doors, looming portals through which a cold wind blows. In this unknowable metropolis, Feta will discover what kind of man he is, and his discovery will rewrite the world. I think that sounds so cool. It sounds just very different to any other fantasy I've heard of before. The setting sounds really interesting. It feels like a weird mixture of modern and fantasy. And again, like I said, I'm a sucker for portal fantasy, so anything with a magical door I'm always going to be excited by. Speaking of which, this is reviewed by Erin Morgenstern, as well as both of the writers of This Is How You Lose the Time War. So I really feel like this could be a hidden gem, and I just love that feeling of finding finding a book that I'm really excited for, but the internet might not have caught on to yet. I'm really excited to give this one a try. So those are all of the 20 books that I currently have out on my library card. Hopefully I can get through a good chunk of them before I have to return them, and of course if I do have to return them I can always check them out again at a later date, so it's not the end of the world. But if there are any on that list that you think I should get to sooner rather than later, I would love to hear your recommendations, especially if you've read any of those ones that I haven't really heard anyone talking about before. Please let me know what you think I should really pick up before I have to return it. I would really love to hear what your most recent library find was, a book that you discovered at the library that you maybe wouldn't have read otherwise. And if you haven't been using your library, then I hope this video was inspiration for you to maybe go and pick up that library card, because it is just such a wonderful resource, and I think it is such a tragedy whenever a library gets shut down, and not just because it's my job. But anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this long video. I hope you found something maybe new to you that sounds interesting, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye.